guys, Jamie Lynn from Heartfelt Horsemanship here. This is my third video on bridling a horse. I want to remember that we're trying to bridle a horse with some partnership. We want this to be a good first experience for Mouse, and I am taking you through the steps that I take to introduce a snaffle into a horse's mouth in a way that doesn't create resentment, that creates partnership, and that promotes good horsemanship as well. Before I get started with that, I just want to remind you guys to like and share our videos if you like what we do and you want to help us change the world, remembering that Heartfelt Horsemanship's purpose is to change the world one horse and one heart at a time. Before I do any more about that, I want to talk about what we have done in the last two videos. So we have made sure that we can drop our head, we can loosen the pole, I can put my hand all over the horse's face, I can get the bridling done. If you notice in the first two videos, he moved his head around still quite a bit, and that's just part of him exploring. So what I'd like to do today is work on a little bit of desensitizing and rewarding him for keeping his head still, so that way he starts holding up his end of the partnership when it comes to accepting the snaffle. Usually where things go wrong is the horse gets a little bit worried, or he starts licking and chewing and they become evasive of what you're doing, of putting a bridle and a piece of metal in their mouth, and then they start moving their head around. So he's being pretty good about not moving his feet away from me, but then his head comes up, or he gets to lick and chew, and he puts his head into a funny position. And when that happens, the metal might clank his teeth, or something, something causes him to raise his head up. And then it doesn't feel very smooth, and that's usually the potential where people grip too hard or try to hold the horse still, and things sort of fall apart in the bridling process. I've had a horse fall apart in the bridling process before, so this is the steps that I want to take now, so I don't end up with a horse who resents the snaffle. I want this to be a really good experience for him. So I'm going to complete the steps that I did in the previous two videos. I'm going to make sure his face is soft. I'm going to get myself into position here. Remember, my hand over his head, so that way his head is and his teeth are in a better place to not be hit with the bridle or hit with the metal on his teeth. I don't think you would like anyone clicking your teeth with a spoon. And now at this point, everyone gets a little bit impatient, and they go, oh, well, he hasn't opened his mouth. And so they start tapping and they start digging into his gums and whatnot. Right now, I need to wait for him to open his mouth. He knows what's expected. He's learned that fast. Right now, he's just going, I'm not really sure if I want to go through that again. It is my obligation to take the time that it takes, so it takes less time later on. So however long this takes is however long it takes for him to open his teeth and allow me to slide that bridle up in. That's usually one of the places where bridling goes wrong for horses. So I want you to be aware of that step, and don't get in a hurry. You have all the time in the world to get it done right. So you can see right there, he's moving his head around, and if I get focused on just getting the straps done, chances are he's probably going to bonk me with his head, I'm going to get annoyed, and that can actually be quite dangerous. So right now, taking the time that it takes so he can hold his head still is very important. So yesterday, something got alerted us. His paddock mates are moving. We'll just give him a minute here to figure out that everything's safe. There's a stranger walking through his paddock right now. They got really distracted. Okay, and we're back. So his mouth is nice and quiet on that snaffle, so now I'm going to take it off. Now how I take it off is just as important as how I put it on. See how his head came up in the air? When the head's up in the air, we know they're on adrenaline. I want to take this off with just as much feeling as I have put into putting it on his head. So again, I want to keep his pole underneath my elbow. If my arm is up there above my head, he's too tall for me, and I can't do this effectively without pinching his ears or pulling the bit up into his mouth. I want this to go nice and smoothly. So I make sure that I put his head in position. I do the near ear first. So that way I'm still holding this, and I'm still in control of where this goes, so I don't end up catching that anywhere. I've still got his head. When his head is still, I'm going to do the other ear. Now, usually people walk away with the bridle to get back to the tack room as fast as possible at this point. I need to put one more step in here and see if I can just let his mouth open and let him release that. And that way, I didn't end up with his head flying up or hooking a tooth or doing something that caused him pain. So these are the things that I want to practice to the point of obsession without causing my horse to become any more worried about the bridling process. At this point, most people would carry on, put the reins on the bit, and away they go. I want to add a few more steps in here. So I need to make sure that he understands what this bridle is going to do and that I can have it look a little bit cleaner than that. So in between now and the next video, I'm going to be putting the snaffle on and off of his face several times. Before I put the snaffle back on though, you can see he's alert, he's very aware of his paddock mate doing something over there. So I'm going to move him around on the ground so you can see what it takes for me to bring him sort of back down out of the clouds and get him relaxed again. Watch how he moves. Right now he's already distracted over there, so I'm going to get him more connected to me. I'm going to stop. I'm going to put the snaffle back on, and then I'm going to move him out again. And what you're going to see is when I go to move him out in the snaffle, you're going to see he gets a little bit clumsy. He's busy licking and chewing at the thing in his mouth. That's potential for danger, and any time we create a potential for danger in our horse, we create potential for them to not trust us. So I want to make sure that I have this bridling process really good before I start riding him in it, before I start moving him around with this on his face. So just enjoy. Feel free to email us with any questions that you have about the next part, and I'm going to move him around now. So you can see he was still looking over his shoulder at his paddock mates. There were some times there he's moving out really quite smoothly. If he were busy chewing on something in his mouth when he was that distracted and that sort of that worried about things, there is a potential to create more worry, to create more drama, and what we're trying to do is cause our horses to become braver partners for us. So again, that's why I'm taking the extra steps to do this enough times that the bridling is smooth, he knows what's expected, and we don't end up putting in bad habits that don't need to be there in the first place. So you can see he goes, okay, I know what's next. He's kind of dropping his head for me, he's curling his head around. He's almost helping me get in position. So right there you can see he went to take his head away from me. And I don't want to start when he is in opposition and in flight mode. When he takes his head away from me, that's flight mode. His feet may not go away, but if I keep fighting him, I'm just going to end up teaching this horse not to be bridled. So I'm going to keep my hand in position on his head. I'm going to bring him back over here. I'm going to rub him and let him know everything's okay. He's still worried about his mate over there. So if I just give him a minute before I bridle him again. I always have time to do things right. I don't want to make time to do things wrong or have to correct something. So taking a pause for the sake of his attention span is absolutely okay and productive. Okay, so I'm going to get myself into position here. So right there, I don't want to hurry and do anything. I'm actually going to release when he puts his head back into position. And by release, I mean take the snaffle away. And then I'll try again. That was a bad footing for me to start out putting the snaffle in. So I'm going to play with that for a little bit, and I'll be back with you guys when I get that cleaned up and can show you the next step. Hi guys, welcome back. So I've been able to do some work with my friend here and have him be able to accept the snaffle a little bit more. Some things I want to remind you of before you go and put the snaffle in is make sure you have control over the head. I can't reiterate that enough, that makes this process better. If your horse isn't ready, he's not ready, you're going to just take the steps to help get him ready. So he was a little bit distracted before. He sees his mate over there and he's still a little bit distracted, which is normal for young horses. I'm not going to proceed with this process if I can't get him to focus on me, because this is the purpose of our session today. So I'm going to go through my steps, and I'm going to try and make sure I am consistent about how I do these steps. That is the habits that a horseman needs to build. I like that he dropped his head low. He wasn't dropping his head low to evade me, and that's very different. If he were dropping his head and taking it away from me, I wouldn't be ready to go past this step. He's keeping his head nice and low. To me, that's a sign of partnership. He understands that the person in charge has to work down here. You think about a kid's horse. I see kids bridling horses all the time, and they cannot get the job done because the horse's head is in the air. It's something to think about. I want my horses to be able to be haltered and bridled by anyone. He brought his head up there. I'm going to remind him this is where I need him to work, this is where I can help him, where we're both more comfortable. I'm going to sort out our mane. So that's starting to look smoother. It's only going to take, about 100 more times, and he's going to look really, nice and slick with that. Maybe not that many. It'll work better the more I am diligent about the habits and consistency of how I'm going to do this. So now that he has the snaffle in his mouth, he's getting comfortable with it. He doesn't take as long to lick and chew. He doesn't try and spit it out. Now is the time I'm going to start moving him around and introducing to him. First, I need him to be desensitized to this thing in his mouth and learn that he can quietly close his mouth around it and not try and spit it out or be evasive. If he's focused on licking and chewing in a way that he's trying to spit it out, that means he is not focused on me. So I'm only going to move him around for a moment. The reason why I'm moving him around is so you guys can see how distracted he is when he's still trying to figure out what this thing in his mouth means, and that he's not really ready to walk off and have me on his back guiding him with it. I'm going to continue teaching you the steps that I use to make sure that that's all going really well before I get on his back and use the snaffle for communication. Okay, so I think you guys can probably see a difference from me moving around with him without the snaffle in his mouth. As soon as I asked him to do something with his feet, you could see, I think the first thing I did was ask him to back up, and he kind of panicked and he threw his head in the air. That is telling me that he is not ready for me to put reins and use this snaffle as a communication device for riding. So here's one of the most important steps that I need you guys to remember. I am going to allow him to wear this snaffle for a dozen sessions, a dozen groundwork sessions, before I ever consider picking up on the snaffle to create a shape. Bits go in a horse's mouth to help them to create a shape and a posture. Bits are not for control, bits are not for stopping. Bits are not there to show them who's boss and inflict pain. Bits are there to finesse that we are trying to create a better shape in our horse, and that is the purpose of moving on to this next step. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to think about to help him understand that he can move around safely with this in his mouth is I'm going to take him through the process that we always use, moving him around with the 4 core movements. So that way he learns to think with that thing in his mouth, and he learns how to maneuver each portion of his body. This is where what you have learned in Module 1 of the correspondence course is going to make sense to you, and you're going to use this process to repeat introducing new things, new ideas, new tools, new places, new postures, new abilities to your horse. So I'm going to go right back to the beginning. I'm going to see if I can teach him to back up. The first try wasn't so good. Okay, he goes, okay, well I can back up with this thing in my mouth. I can move forward when asked with this thing in my mouth. I can disengage with this thing in my mouth. I can move my forequarters with this thing in my mouth. Okay, so this process was taught to Warrior the first rides. He's known this for the last 6 months, so you can see all of those movements are very familiar to him. The one thing that has changed is now we have a snaffle in his mouth. And it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but for him it could be something that rattles his cage and inhibits his training, or if we take the steps like we are doing now to be really careful and have it be a good process for him, it should excel his training. So you can see all of his movements were good. He's operating in a very light phase using rhythmic pressure. But when we use a snaffle on our horse's mouth, we are using steady pressure. So now I'm going to repeat those movements using steady pressure, and then I'm going to repeat those movements by actually activating the snaffle and seeing where we get with that today. If he gives me some good tries, I'm going to stop for today, and then we'll finish. We'll talk about more steps tomorrow. I'm going to move his forequarters here. I'm going to come around and activate the snaffle over here. You're going to see I want to use as little pressure as possible to have him move his forequarters off of the snaffle over here. I'm going to see as light as possible. You can see I wouldn't be able to turn him right away without showing him what this means. And I'm looking for that left front foot to come off the ground. So right there, that would tell me that at this stage, if I were to use my snaffle to try and turn him, again, snaffles are not for control, snaffles are for shape. I only want to use my reins or my bridle the very last phase. So that tells me that I wouldn't have any steering if I hopped on and rode him now. I need to put these steps and the understanding of what the snaffle means in place first before I attempt to ride him. So I'm going to do that with all of my movements. I'm going to keep working on this, and I'll show you the progress that we get tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.